Welcome to the Performance Around the Clock podcast. I am Professor Satchin Panda, a scientist in the field of circadian rhythm. In this podcast, I will talk to experts in many different fields about science, health, and human performance. You'll also find out why circadian rhythms is my favorite topic. I hope you enjoy the podcast and thank you for listening. Welcome to another episode of Performance Around the Clock. And today I'm super excited to have this special episode with Dr. Emily Manoogian. And Emily is a scientist at the Salk Institute, and she's also an affiliate adjunct with UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego Medical School, where she conducts clinical trials on time-restricted eating. And so, welcome, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
So, for all of us, can you tell us what is time-restricted eating versus intermittent fasting?
Yeah. So, time restricted eating is really just consolidating when you eat to a consistent 8 to 10 hour interval every day. Intermittent fasting is actually a much broader term that could mean many different things. And when you hear it kind of in everyday talk, it's interpreted many different ways. You see a 5-2 diet where it's you do whatever you want 5 days a week, and then 2 days a week you have very restricted eating, or there's an 8-hour kind of flux, or maybe 8 hours every day, but it can move around. And all of those other forms of intermittent fasting really contain some kind of caloric restriction that really is not required for time-restricted eating. And time-restricted eating is also the only version that really takes into consideration circadian rhythms. The others really kind of ignore that, and you don't capture that really powerful aspect of it.
Okay, so there are quite a few things here. So, but in popular press, typically people relate intermittent fasting to what you just described, time-restricted eating. For example, there is this 8-16 diet where people have to eat for 8 hours and fast for 16 hours, and then 10-14, and then 6-18, do all these maths. So suppose say we start with 8-16, 8 hours of eating, 16 hours of fasting. And what you're saying is we have to limit all the calorie intake to that 8 hours, and then you said consistent.
Yeah, so it's really important that it's the same time of day every day. And also, if you're going to optimize it, and really what time restricted eating also usually takes into account is that you're aligning this with your active phase. So, meaning you're eating when your body is active and awake, and you're letting your body fast and rest while you're sleeping. And again, this is a really important component of it that other forms of intermittent fasting don't always take into consideration.
So there are also this confusion that this form of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, is it necessary that people should finish eating before sunset or before evening?
If you want to make some kind of general claim and say, for everyone, let's set something, then you might come up with something like sunset. But for most people, that's not a realistic number. There is no one time that's perfect for everyone. It comes down to your internal biological clocks. So depending on what your schedule is and the environment that you're exposed to, it may be a very different situation. Someone who's waking up at 6 a.m. and going to bed at 9 p.m. might have a very different eating schedule on the clock time than someone who's waking up at 8 and going to bed at midnight, even though maybe relatively it's the same. You say relatively, maybe they both start eating 2 hours after they wake up. One would be 8, one would be 10, right? So they can be very different times depending on your specific schedule.
So let's now break it down. So suppose that somebody wakes up at 8 o'clock, goes to bed at midnight, and this person wants to do time restricting.
Yeah.
What would be the ideal window if this person
Yeah.
starts with, say, 8 hours, or if the person decides to do 10 hours a week?
Yeah. So again, it depends a bit on an individual schedule. So my general guidelines are, let's break it down to, let's shorten it to 12 at first. So say wait at least 1 hour after you wake up, let your body wake up and prepare for the day. Let those melatonin levels go down and all that good stuff, get some bright light. And then stop eating at least 3 hours before you go to bed. So if you do that and you're in bed for hopefully 8 hours, you're already down to a 12-hour window. And within that, you really got to find the time that works for you. So it could be 9 to 7 or 10 to 8 at the latest, or technically 11 to 9 at the latest, but usually that's later than what most people would do because you've probably been active for a really long time. So usually for someone like that, we've seen that it's most effective to do like a 9 to 7, but that could flux just a little bit based on other things that might be necessary. Like if you have a family dinner at 7, maybe you make it 9:30 to 7:30 so you can fit that in, make it feasible for you.
So, and the question is, who should do time restricted eating?
Everyone should do time restricted eating. Everyone should do time restricted eating. That's like saying who should brush their teeth or who should, move your body or who should sleep. Everyone should do this. It's part of kind of it's not this overly restrictive thing. It really is part of kind of healthy eating. Now, there are some caveats to that. So maybe not everyone, most adults. This really hasn't been explored in kids. And they might need a longer window, maybe a 12-hour window or something. But realistically, no one should be eating the second they wake up and the second they go to bed, except for like an infant who's, has a very small stomach. And that's a different story. But if you're a full-grown adult, the only other case that really hasn't been studied well is, obviously certain disease states or with, very specific metabolic disorders, but really it's pregnant women have not, or breastfeeding women have not really been studied. Having been a pregnant and breastfeeding woman myself, I've practiced it personally and had no problems with it.
But did you do 8 hours eating?
No, I did a 10. And to be totally honest, it was different with each pregnancy. It was very easy for my first, and it was harder on my second, mainly due to like nausea issues and things like that.
So let's go back because this is a very important point. There are not many. Are there any time restricting studies on pregnant women?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Are you aware of it? I know that there were some that I think are ongoing. That we're looking at. I don't believe they were published yet, but I know there were some studies looking at time restricted eating in women with gestational diabetes. But I think it was just preliminary data I saw somewhere. I don't think it's actually been published yet. Yeah.
So, coming back to your example, would you feel comfortable talking about your TRE during pregnancy or before pregnancy or something like that? Because there are many who email me about whether they should be doing TRE or this form of what you call intermittent fasting during pregnancy. And I always say, well, there is not enough clinical trials.
No,
but
really
again, the clinical trials, I think the sequence of events that happen is, as we have seen in clinical science, there is clinical case report. Maybe 1 or 2 individuals went through an intervention, and then the doctor writes up that case study. And then that case study gives some confidence to the physician to start a small number of people on that intervention. Pilot study, and then maybe a clinical trial, randomized clinical trial. So now going back to many women who may be planning for pregnancy. Will it help, or do you think it is helpful if they start some form of time restricting before even they are getting pregnant?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. So I think one of the keys for me was I didn't start this while I was pregnant. I had been practicing it for years beforehand. So it wasn't like a shock to my system. It was something that my body was used to. I didn't have an appetite in the evening because I had been on time restricted eating for a long time. And so I was able to maintain a 10-hour window without any problem. But going into it, I didn't know what it was going to be like. So I also, kind of gave myself the permission, like if I feel like I need to eat, I'm going to eat. I think maybe one time I ate late and I didn't, I wasn't feeling well that night or I hadn't eaten or something like that. But both of so I did it pretty diligently on my first, My second was harder, and I was surprised.
So in the first one,
But yeah.
so let's start with the first one. It was 10 hours, you said?
Yeah, my first one was 10 hours, and I
And
kept the window that I had previously. Yeah.
yeah. So 10 hours roughly. I know that you're always in the lab by 8 o'clock in the morning. So I
Well, I'm
always
able to eat
wonder.
at work, which is a luxury. Yes.
So what was your 10 hours like?
I think at the time I was doing like a 9:30 to 7:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 9:30 to 7:30. So you're bringing your breakfast to
Bringing
work.
breakfast to work. It might have even been
Yeah.
10 to, there's a chance it was 10 to 8. It was
Okay.
it was a while ago now. But it wouldn't have been later than that. I think we were usually finishing dinner by 7:30. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would shoot for a 9:30 to 7:30, bring breakfast to work, eat while I'm here, get home, eat dinner, done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
water
one
only
thing
after.
that you mentioned, let's go back a little bit, that time restricted eating is based on the science of circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
And circadian rhythms are 24 hours rhythms. And how does circadian rhythms link to, say, menstrual cycle or female reproductive cycle? Because again, this is an anecdote I heard from a science teacher in high school who said that when young adults, particularly women, high school age women, when they do time restricted eating 10 hours, then they become more regular. And also in mouse studies, we have seen
Yeah.
that mice that have disrupted circadian rhythm due to bad genes, they have irregular estrous cycle in
Yeah.
mice. So maybe this is one idea that people who are trying to get pregnant, maybe beforehand, they can try time restricted eating so that their hormones are balanced.
Yeah. Right. So kind of as you mentioned, is the circadian system controls hormone release, and it does control, hormone levels throughout your body. And a lot of fertility really links back to this kind of specific timing and this fluctuation and this pattern. It's not just is it there, but the timing of when it's there and the amplitude of those hormones. And those are heavily controlled by circadian patterns. And you do see higher rates of infertility in shift workers and people who do have disrupted rhythms. So yeah, time restricted eating is one more way you can support really good circadian health, which is why I see it as this kind of general good for most people, because it is kind of this very passive, non-invasive way to support your body's natural rhythms. And that's going to support things like fertility or, normal hormone release and things like that. And when you are pregnant, you're going through all kinds of changes and challenges. And so having that extra support, I think, at least seems like it could only help.
Yeah. Okay. So throughout your pregnancy, you did this and you didn't feel like you were eating less.
No, I mean, in my first trimester, I ate less because I had horrible morning sickness, but that had nothing to do with the time restricted eating. No, I don't think I ate any less because of the time restricted eating. And yeah, I didn't feel restricted in any way. I gained weight the way I was supposed to. I was, I was very lucky to have a very healthy, natural pregnancy.
Yeah. But at least you also eat healthy.
I mean, I try, yeah.
You try. Okay. We got a little digressed here because you mentioned that time restricting studies have not been done in pregnancy, and then I remember.
Yeah, I mean, they really haven't, and it's
Yeah.
something that needs to be done. But to be fair, most things have not been studied in pregnant women, right? Like even the recommendations you get from your doctor, like it's okay to take this, it's okay to take that. There's actually been no studies. It's just kind of anecdotal. People have been doing it for a long time, but no one really knows. There are very few things that have actually been tested in pregnant women.
Yeah. But the take-home message is it's not that everyone who is trying to be pregnant or is pregnant should immediately start time restricted eating, but this is something the person can discuss with the physician because there are many. Every pregnancy, as you said, even N of one, your first pregnancy, you said, is very different from second pregnancy. So second pregnancy, what happened? 8-10 hours was difficult?
Yeah, 10 hours was hard. I think it was really not so much from a biological point of view as I had another kid already. And so there were different challenges on my time. And then also I had more morning sickness the second time. And so sometimes it was just like I needed a few crackers to kind of ease my stomach or things like that. But I wasn't eating big meals in the evening. And I did try to stick to a shorter window. And actually, as the pregnancy went on and the morning sickness relieved, I was able to get back on track a bit more. But yeah, I think usually I found I would sleep better if I'm not eating late. Even those few times where you do eat a little later that night, you're like, oh, I didn't sleep as well that night, or I don't feel quite right, or I feel a little bloated or something like that. And so I found I would feel better when I did the time restricted eating. And it didn't, I don't think the pregnancy really had huge amounts to do with it, aside from, coping with morning sickness by
Yeah, yeah.
having something small. Yeah.
So you also mentioned one thing that gestational diabetes, and unfortunately, those studies have not been done. But let's go to diabetes
Yeah.
and pre-diabetes. And you said that everybody should try time restricted eating.
Yeah.
And then one concern people always have is if you're going through, say, 12 to 14 or 16 hours of fasting throughout
Yeah.
night, then your blood glucose levels might drop. So can you tell us what kind of studies you have run so far? Because I know that you're first or co-first authors on at least 3 or 4 papers.
Yeah.
And then there are many papers, almost the last time I checked, 29 or 30 papers on which you are an author. So you have been involved in many different studies on
Yeah.
time restricted. And I would say, I think your name has been on more number of time restricting studies than anyone else.
So maybe you.
So
I think you beat me on that by just a few.
yeah. So can you tell us what are the different patient population you have
Yeah.
dealt with?
No, it's a great question. So, most time restricted eating studies have focused on individuals who have elevated weight or elevated blood glucose, either fasting or hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of the standard, kind of gold standard of how you assess glucose. And it's really an estimate of the past 3 months of glucose. And so, those have been kind of a main population. But we've some of our bigger studies have looked at individuals with metabolic syndrome, which is really a combination of factors that are increased risk for diabetes, increased risk for cardiovascular disease. We've also worked with shift workers, which was really exciting, and we can talk about that more later, but only a small portion of them actually were at risk for, metabolic syndrome or prediabetes. And that's been true for many of our collaborators as well, like really looking at this cardiometabolic group and those challenges specifically. And now we're also running a trial in individuals with type 2 diabetes. So it's a little bit more progressed, and we're able to see how time restricted eating works when it is a bit more serious of a situation, and also in combination with other drugs, which is really interesting as well.
Yeah. So where should we begin?
Where should we begin? No, so let's start with where it kind of started. So we were first looking at time restricted eating in individuals with metabolic syndrome. So
what is metabolic syndrome?
metabolic syndrome is a combination of 3 of 5 factors, including elevated triglycerides, elevated blood pressure, elevated waist circumference, low HDL, and elevated fasting glucose or A1C. And so it's really kind of this combined factor. And so depending on what factors you're trying to look for, you kind of have to narrow down your population, right? Because 2 different people with metabolic syndrome can be very different biologically, right? Someone might have increased weight, increased blood pressure, and increased glucose, but be totally fine in their cholesterol. And you could have another person who's kind of the opposite, right? And so when you're trying to look at effects on glucose and you have someone starting at different levels, you don't always get a clear shake there. So you really do have to make sure you're looking at the same population. And this is a general theme of, if you're trying to look at humans, you've got to narrow it down and look for the same problem, because humans are extremely heterogeneous. So you've got to look at a couple factors. Anyway, I digress. So looking at that and that group of participants, we just said, okay, we've got about 20 people. Let's try time restricted eating for 12 weeks. We did just 10 hours. So it's not a very aggressive, it's pretty easy to adhere to. Typically people choose 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. And after 12 weeks, we kind of did all these other tests against. We're able to look at a variety of different biomarkers in the blood. We do continuous glucose monitors, stuff like that. And in this first study, we found that even though all the participants were actually on statins to lower their cholesterol, we still saw a significant decrease in cholesterol, which was really exciting, specifically LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol that causes all these plaques. And we also found that in the individuals that had elevated A1C to begin with, they also saw a significant decrease as well. And that was really exciting to see. And some of them were also on medications like metformin, things like that.
So what you're saying is, for many of the diseases, high blood sugar or high cholesterol, um, people may be taking medication and they were on stable dose of medication.
Yes. So, yes, for any of our studies, they can be on medication, but they do need to be stable for at least 3 months. So, we know that any changes that we might see during the intervention aren't due to new effects of a medication or something like that.
So that means the effect of medication will reduce your cholesterol, say, by 10% or 5%. And then on top of that, if you do time ratio eating, you can
Yeah.
get more benefit.
Yeah, and that's what was really exciting was that it's in addition to the medication, right? So whatever your current standard of care is, whether it's medication or you're on diet or lifestyle, if you're at a stable place where you've tried everything and you're doing everything you can, time restricted eating can be an additional benefit to you. And in some cases, if you get enough benefit, you might even be able to decrease medication, right?
Yeah.
So as I had said, we did this first trial in about 20 people, and then we just completed, really excited to talk about it for the first time, really.
Yeah.
We just completed the TIME-IT study, which was a much larger population. So we're talking about over 100 people. We're looking at 108 people total, either randomized to time-restricted eating or standard of care, where they get standard dietary and health advice. And again, they did this for 12 weeks. And in that population, we saw a significant decrease of A1C, which was really exciting because
Let's go back. What is
Yeah.
the inclusion criteria? Because you said
yeah,
that
yeah. Inclusion criteria is
everybody,
important.
because I can have metabolic syndrome and you might have metabolic syndrome, but my A1C may not be high.
Right.
Your A1C
Yes.
might be high.
So we took
let's-
that into consideration. So in this study, everyone had to have metabolic syndrome qualifying at least 3 factors, but they also had to have had prediabetes. So meaning that they had this elevated fasting glucose or A1C, where we know that glucose is specifically a challenge for them.
But A1C can go anywhere from 5.7 to 10.
Yes.
So
Yes. So we were looking in these earlier ranges where it was, so normal is below 5.6. So we're looking at 5.6 up to 7. And 6.5 would really be the point where you'd say it's diabetic. I think we had one person over 6.5. So the average in this group was only like 5.85 or 5.87, depending on SOC or TRE. And so it was a relatively low number. I would consider these are very early pre-diabetic, just with a little bit of flux, they might be normal, that they're very early stages. And
but is it worth treating people with
Of course
pre-diabetes?
it's worth treating pre-diabetes.
Why?
Because
this is very important because
Yeah.
the last time I checked, I saw a disturbing statistics that in California, we live in California, so I'm always curious about what happens in the state. Nearly 52%, roughly 50, suppose say 1 in 2 adults might have pre-diabetes.
Yeah.
And when people have pre-diabetes, then what happens?
Yeah. So
what happens now and what
Yeah.
might happen to them in future?
Yeah, so prediabetes is extremely common, unfortunately. And really, once you get to the point of having prediabetes, it's almost inevitable that you will develop into full type 2 diabetes at some point. And so trying to find a way to prevent that progression or somehow reverse it is really what's exciting. And so to see that we could target people that were in early stages where usually you think there's not a lot of room to benefit, like that's like being just a little bit overweight. You're not expecting dramatic changes, right? You're just hoping you can control it. And so by looking in that group, we were really excited that not only were we able to decrease the A1C a little bit, we were also able to see other effects. And that decrease in A1C was not insignificant. It was a 0.1% change, which is, not this huge number. But when we look historically in context, the diabetes prevention program, which is like the gold standard of what you can do to stop diabetes. And there were 2 forms of it. One was a metformin intervention, and one was this behavioral intervention. And both of them had the behavioral intervention had a 0.1 decrease, the same thing that we had. And that protocol takes, it's like a very long, I think it was over 2 years of time. They had many visits with dietitians. It was very involved, and it's a great program. But even with that, the best you can do, we were able to see that same benefit just in 12 weeks with very minimal contact. And again, not to say you couldn't do both together. That would be great. Let's put them together. But time-restricted eating did have that significant benefit, and we're hoping it does have this extended prevention benefit.
Yeah, so let's go back to diabetes prevention program, because you said that the results in your new study are comparable to diabetes prevention program, which was done in early 2000s. Of course, that was a much larger study. I
Yes.
think it was 2,000 plus people
Yes.
and multiple location, and they went through 6 months of, I think, intensive, what they call intensive lifestyle intervention. People were supposed to reduce their caloric intake, so there was calorie counting, and also a lot of physical activities, so
Yep.
that they could achieve, I don't remember, 5 to 10% of body weight loss.
Yeah, it's a pretty intensive lifestyle intervention. I
Yeah.
mean, it's very time consuming. Yeah.
And also it's, I think the target was 5% weight loss, so they achieved 5 to 6% weight loss. Whereas your new study is what, 108 individuals.
Much smaller. Yeah, we are not
Much
on the
smaller.
scale of the DPP. I'm not making that claim.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that.
Yeah. No. Good point. This is more of a, if we're trying to understand how these results compare to what we've seen in this population, that they are really comparable to kind of the best that's out there.
Yeah. So the point is, this 0.1% decrease in A1C among pre-diabetes is clinically meaningful.
Right. And so in the diabetes prevention program, they actually followed them up to 2 years out. And one of the things that they saw was that they were also able to decrease the progression to type 2 diabetes significantly. And so we're hoping that this is a similar path, but really future studies need to be done over, 2-3 years on larger sites. I mean, this really needs to become a much more, intensive trial similar to the DPP to answer those questions.
But when they did the DPP, there was no continuous glucose monitor. And now
Yes.
that you have continuous glucose monitor,
Yeah.
is there anything else that you're learning? Because A1C is something that you cannot
Yeah.
get from your CGM day
Correct.
after day. What are the readings from the CGM that people should pay attention to,
Yeah.
and which ones are improved or deteriorated,
Yeah.
let's say, under time restricted?
Yeah, so CGMs are super powerful, and I think they're really enabling us to get such a deep insight into what's going on, day to day, within a day, between days, all those really cool things, and in response to specific meals, etc. And we're seeing a few big things. So
for how many days, can you just tell us?
Yeah, so
how the CGM measurements were done at the beginning of the study and maybe
yeah.
the end
So
of the study?
in both of our studies in patients with metabolic syndrome, and most of our studies actually, we do a 14-day continuous glucose monitor. And so these participants are wearing it for 14 days, and we get a reading about every 15 minutes. Sometimes we use a 10-day monitor, and you get a reading every 5 minutes, but they're all very similar. So you're able to see someone's glucose throughout the entire day.
Can the participants see their results?
No, we use specific CGMs that make it so the participants are blind to it, so we're not getting any confounding behavior from seeing their glucose at a specific time. So we do it at a 2-week baseline period where we're just trying to assess their current standard or your current life. And then we do it again the last 2 weeks of the intervention so we can understand how it's changed following those 12 weeks. And there's a few obvious things, what was the average glucose over that period of time? What was an area under the curve? How many times did you go above? But there are some other things that I think are really exciting from maybe a little different perspective. So one thing that we've seen is glucose variability really improves. And there's 2 different kinds of glucose variability that we can look at. One is looking at the variability within a day. How much is your glucose going up and down? How much are you kind of moving around throughout a given day? And the second is looking at the variability between days. So is one day very similar to the next? The higher variability is meaning you're probably not having as good of regulation, or you're having more challenges, right? And so your glucose really is not just being regulated and staying around a set number. It's really moving a lot up and down.
So it's mostly spikes. What people in popular media say they're getting glucose spikes, right?
So you can, seeing glucose spikes or seeing these, really elevated periods for long periods of time that kind of move around, maybe either a individual spike or a prolonged spike in response to food. Yeah.
I see. So let's go back. So these people whom you recruited, they were having pre-diabetes, and you looked at your glucose and how many hours they were eating at baseline. Did you have a criteria?
Yeah. So, but there's more on the CGM too. We'll get back to that. Okay. So
no, because we'll see, like, okay, so whether they were spiking during day or night.
Yes, absolutely. So that gets into the other points as well.
Yeah.
So all of our participants have to have at least a 12-hour eating window at baseline. So when we put them on a 10-hour eating window or an 8-hour eating window, we can see a significant difference. And we also personalize eating windows for our participants. So if you start with a 12-hour eating window, we decrease it by 4 hours. So you would go down to 8. If you're at 14, you'd go to 10, and then everything in between those 2 hours. If you're more than 14, you still go to 10. So somewhere between an 8 to 10 personalized out eating window. So everyone had at least a 12-hour eating window. Everyone goes down to 8 to 10 in the TRE group. And we see this significant decrease in both types of glucose variability. The other thing that we see that's really interesting is we see this specific decrease in glucose while you're sleeping. And so
are they becoming hypoglycemic?
No, they are not becoming hypoglycemic. And I think that's a really important point. Many of our participants have been on medication, and we do not see them going hypoglycemic if they're on time-restricted eating, even on many types of different medications. And so what you're seeing, though, is previously people would eat quite late, and then you see the glucose rise. And actually, Frank Shear had a really nice paper on an in-lab study where if you give people food just before they go to bed, their glucose stays high, and it continues to stay high while they're sleeping.
So just to remind the viewers, like what Emily mentioned, Frank Shear is a professor at Harvard Medical School. And in fact, we actually discussed with Frank a few episodes ago.
I think he was on your show,
yeah. And he does some of the very well-controlled studies on circadian rhythm, glucose regulation, appetite regulation, melatonin, all that stuff. Yes. So the glucose actually goes up and stays up if you eat close to bedtime.
Right. When your body is trying to fast, it is not storing all that glucose away. And so you can have these really elevated levels of glucose when you're sleeping, when you should be having much lower levels. And so what we found is by just, moving that eating forward, right? Just scooting it forward, usually just, 2 or 3 hours, you're now having lower glucose throughout the full night. So moving it forward a couple hours, maybe your glucose is lower for 8 hours throughout the night. And so we're seeing this overall decrease in glucose levels throughout the night and overall, which is really exciting. And we do see that the individual spikes during the day usually are lowered as well.
So to summarize, during the daytime, the magnitude of the spike, how far glucose goes up, it doesn't go as high as they used to. And then if they go up, then they're also coming down a little bit faster.
Yeah.
So that you don't have too much.
Yeah. You don't get as high, you come down faster, you don't shoot up and down as much, and you're able to keep your glucose lower during the night.
And at nighttime, you're not going into hypoglycemia. That's very important.
You're staying in a healthy range during the night. Yes.
And then particularly the nighttime glucose regulation. This cannot be studied without a continuous glucose monitor, right?
I mean, unless you're going to wake someone up and jab them throughout the night, or put in an IV or something extreme along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, like for example, none of the laboratory tests during daytime can tell us how was the glucose regulation at nighttime.
No, and really they're super insightful, because people who do have type 2 diabetes sometimes get very high at night and do get very low very high during the day, very low at night. They can move around depending on what their challenges are. But an A1C is an average, right? So you're just looking at what the average is. If someone's moving around because they have very poor glucose regulation, it might look almost normal. And so, the CGMs are super insightful.
So another thing is people always, I have heard it from many people, some people, the thing that if you have gone through 14 hours of fasting and then in the morning you have a breakfast,
Mhm.
your glucose might shoot up extremely high, dangerously high. So that's
Mhm.
why some people, some physicians, they say, no, don't fast too much because after fasting, long fasting, when you eat, the body may not be able to
Mhm.
handle sugar much better. Do you see any of that? Means, do you see dangerously high level of
No,
sugar at
we
breakfast or
we
something?
haven't seen dangerously high levels of sugar in the first bout, but again, we're not doing extreme fasting.
Yeah.
It's 14 to 16 hours, mainly when you're asleep.
Hmm.
And we're also not promoting sleep, eating really late in your day where you're awake and have been active and done all this stuff and you're still not eating and still not eating and that kind of thing. We're trying to align your eating window with when you're awake. So wake up, let your body wake up for an hour or two, then start eating. And I think that there have been some studies that show that you can see a notable change in glucose if you skip breakfast and you go straight to lunch. But again, in none of our participants did they skip breakfast.
Hmm.
They're achieving this time restricted eating window by literally just starting a little later and ending a little sooner. It's just pushing it in. It's not this really extreme, I'm starving myself kind of situation.
Yeah, because I have seen quite a few studies where they say start eating at noon and finish at
Yeah.
8 p.m. or something like that. And it maybe some people can stick to it. Personally, I tried that noon to 8 p.m. and it was very difficult for me because in the morning I'm most active. I'm more productive and more active in the first half of the day.
Yeah.
And I just felt low energy if I
I
didn't
think
eat
noon to
breakfast.
8 is the wrong time for most people. I'm sure you could find an exception where I would say, okay, but I think for most people, shifting it more to their active phase and not too long after they've woken up is really
But I
probably
guess
ideal.
I will take one exception to your statement that I would say that just like exercise at any time is better than no exercise at all. So similarly, I think if somebody is comfortable doing noon to 8,
Yeah.
that's much better than not doing at all.
Do you think it's better than doing 10 to 8? I think 10 to 8 is actually better.
Okay, so when you, I guess
I
out of all of our viewers, if you have enough money, let's do this trial.
Let's do
That
this
will do the
trial.
10 to 8 versus 12 to 8.
I think
Uh,
10 to 8 is probably better. I
I mean,
digress.
my personal preference is also 10 to 8, although I kind of do 9 or 8 to 6.
Yeah,
But it's an interesting conversation because it also depends on what time people are waking up. But the bottom
absolutely.
line is some form of time restriction is better than random eating anytime, and
Yes.
then we can debate
Yes.
about.
I mean, we don't know. That
Yeah.
small nuance we don't know, but yes, I agree. Any form is good.
So then, when it comes to this time restricting, another thing that distinguishes your studies from all the other studies is you also use this app, My Circadian Clock app.
Yeah.
And traditionally, most of the behavioral interventions are done in a way where you bring people for in-person interview and then in-person coaching and lessons and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And here you're doing more thorough monitoring.
Yeah.
Are you finding that people are uh, finding it very difficult to adhere to time restricting because they have to use an app? So what does this app do? And
Yeah, no, the My Circadian Clock app has been a very powerful tool for us, both for monitoring participants as well as for implementing the intervention. Because, like you said, any behavioral intervention requires effort. You can't just tell someone, exercise every day, eat healthy, do this, and then be like, go, and just not talk to them again. It's not going to be effective. And the app is just a new tool where we can really keep on top of people and understand when they're actually eating. For timing of eating specifically, it's super important because people forget when they eat, even within a day. It's very easy to forget when you eat. I remember one time I was testing out the app before I was starting a study, and I was diligently logging things. And I went back to check, and I was like, "Oh no, there's an error in the app. I definitely didn't eat late that night." And I went and clicked on it and saw a picture of the food that I ate, and was like, "Oh, yes, I did." And I was actively thinking about it, And I study this, and I still forgot. And so it's really amazing to have something where people can just take a quick picture and be like, yes, I've logged it. And in real time, we can see this. And so that's been very crucial. And, historically, nutritional studies had food journals, which can sometimes be in real time, but frequently are not. And even in a lot of time restricted eating trials, they're retroactively saying it, and that can lead to a lot of error just because people forget when they eat. So, what the app does, it's you open it up, you can monitor pretty much anything, but we're mainly focusing on when people are eating and drinking. They can take a quick picture, put just a word annotation, and save it, and it timestamps it, and then we're able to see it in real time, which is really important because we can help people form those habits of logging and of sticking to time restricted eating, and we can see if people are logging. If not, we can remind them, be like, hey, it looks like you forgot to log something. Or, hey, it looks like maybe, you're eating outside your window or something along those lines. And we can get them back on track with something as simple as a push notification, that really is not too time consuming for either of us. They can see it when they want to see it, and they can get that little reminder and get them back on track. And so we've found that real time monitoring, them being able to see what they're logging, and having that, pretty mild feedback from us has really been very effective to help people adopt those new habits.
So what you're saying is, if you just tell a participant that, hey, go ahead and eat between 12 and 8, noon and 8, you think that they are not going to be able to stick to that? Or there is a fraction of people who actually
I
need
think
some help?
there's always some people that can do it, but I think when you look at a population, you're going to get a lot more success when you have some guidance and monitoring. And the common saying, what's the word? You mind what you monitor. You manage what you monitor.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the exact words, but you know what I mean. You improve what you actually look at, right?
Yeah.
And so when people, even just logging your own food, people will eat healthier, right? Because you're seeing it and you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
So if you just say, yes, go eat between 12 and 8, unlike other things like exercise more and diet more and all these other things, you probably could pull it off easier than some of these other
Yeah.
more behavioral interventions. But just saying it and letting them go, yeah, I think that's where a lot of the TRE trials that have had null results, I think that's really where one of the shortfalls have been, is that they had very little intervention or no intervention at all. They just kind of told them to do it, and then there was almost no monitoring. And I think that's where, those kind of fell short in the behavioral intervention realm.
What are the challenges you see participants report? Like, some people say, yes, it is easy. And then some
Yeah.
people tell me that it's really hard for
Yeah.
me to adopt
Yeah.
this kind of intervention. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I'll talk to some people and they'll think it's just the easiest thing in the world, and other people find it completely impossible. And usually it's because they have restrictions on their time, from something outside of, their own biology, right? Either they've got to take care of their kids, they want to exercise. Actually, that was one of my bigger challenges, is trying to fit in my exercise with seeing my kids and getting them to bed and trying to eat before, like all these things, trying to manage that kind of schedule, or certain work schedules, right? So some forms of shift work do make that very challenging, which is why we are actively starting studies to research that, which I'm really excited about, because I think we can find something to help them for sure. But yeah, it's usually work or family, that makes it so it's like you've got some other responsibility, and your schedule may not be regular. Your schedule may have demands at different times where it's requiring you to be awake at different hours or not allowing you to eat, at certain times. Like we mentioned, my schedule, that worked for me because I have the luxury of eating at my work, which many people do, but some do not. If you're not able to eat while you're working, then that means you have to eat before you work or at a break or something like that, and that can create its own challenges as well.
And do you see any confusion among people? Like, for example, what I typically find is people will say, well, can I drink
Yeah.
anything outside this window?
Yeah.
And when it comes to drinking anything from soda water, sparkling water to Coke,
Yeah.
Diet Coke,
Yeah.
ginger ale,
Ginger ale specifically. That's
or
yeah.
or Dr. Pepper.
No. We had a participant once that went a little crazy with some ginger ale.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah. So actually, drinking. Let's go back to alcohol for a second. That
Yeah.
is the biggest challenge to TRE. I think social scenarios, but
Yeah.
usually they're rare enough where it's not a problem. If it's one day a week, it's usually okay. But that is people's biggest challenge otherwise. So when we run our trials, we're really saying water only
Yeah.
outside of that window, and I would never restrict water. Drink water.
Yeah.
But other things you really probably shouldn't. Sparkling water is a gray zone, water with some lemon, those are probably not big problems. But when we get into things like artificial sweeteners, caffeinated beverages, coffee with collagen in it, now we're really getting into things here where you're affecting big parts of your body. You're affecting arousal systems in your brain. You're waking up your system in a different way. Your body has to respond to it. You're really not fasting anymore. And some trial, in our firefighter study, we did allow black coffee as necessary, but they were also active, on duty, working 24 hours. And if they needed it for safety, we allowed it. And they still were able to dramatically decrease their coffee intake or just delay it until their eating window. But on occasion, they'd have a cup of black coffee. And I think that was reasonable for them. But that's also very different than someone on a normal 9 to 5.
You talked about alcohol. That alcohol.
Yeah.
Can they have alcohol at lunch?
I mean, that's not up to me.
No, have you
You
seen
could.
people? Have you seen people
No, I
changing their
don't
alcohol
think the
timing?
change has been to move it to lunch. I think it's more of like a happy hour, which
Yeah,
I
yeah, I mean,
admit does
yeah.
not exist in all parts of the country because of alcohol laws. But just shifting it to having a glass of wine with dinner rather than after dinner.
Mhm.
I think that's where I remember before I started this whole field, and I think you and I were talking about time restricted eating. At that time, I used to have a glass of wine after dinner, and I was looking at my eating window, and I was like, I'm at like 14, 15 hours. Like, I could cut off 3 hours just by moving my wine. And that was the easiest thing to do, and I instantly got down to like 12, and that was not a big change. It was
But I
very
hope
easy
you're
to
not
do.
bringing your wine to work.
No, I'm not having my wine at lunch. I'm not having anyone right now. I'm still breastfeeding.
Okay.
And I'm on time restricted eating. But no, I think it's just a matter of, rather than having these really late night drinks, moving it up to be with your meal. I think similarly with desserts, rather than having it after your dinner, have it with lunch or in between lunch and dinner, or just, immediately following dinner, rather than having this delayed effect. And I think usually that's a, easier to accept saying, okay, I'm going to have this cake with my lunch than don't eat cake ever again. Again, not that you should eat cake all the time, but if you are going to have it, you can make it better for yourself just by having it at the right time of day.
And coming back to alcohol, since I mean, I don't know about you, but after I started time restricting, what I personally, means I had the same drinking problem in a different way. That yes, I used to have a glass of wine or beer late at night, and then when I tried to advance it, then what I realized was my overall alcohol intake went down because there's not enough time. And then second thing, what I personally felt was my alcohol tolerance changed. So in any of your studies, have you looked at specifically alcohol intake, and does time restricting make people binge drink before they're starting their fasting?
That's a good question. No, we have not seen binge drinking. So in the firefighter study, we actually did see a significant decrease in alcohol specifically in the group that did time restricted eating, which is interesting because this was not on their work days, right? So we're not talking about the days they were on shift because they can't drink alcohol at all when they're on a 24-hour shift. But on their off days, they did drink less alcohol when they did time restricted eating. So again, I think part of it is just they don't have as much time to drink. You're not drinking late at night. But in our latest study, we actually didn't see a change in alcohol. In the one where in metabolic syndrome with prediabetes, where we saw all these health benefits, we actually didn't see a significant change in alcohol. But it also did not increase. We're not seeing this binge drinking effect of I'm going to get those, I'm going to get that six pack down no matter what. That's not really the effect that we're seeing.
That's not happening. That's not
No,
happening.
no.
Okay, so in this time restricting study that just came out in congratulations in
Thank
Annals
you.
of Internal Medicine,
Thanks.
which is a very respectable journal. And so the primary outcome was
Hemoglobin A1C.
hemoglobin A1C or blood glucose.
Yeah.
What else did these participants have at baseline, and were there any other benefits?
Yeah. So the other big benefits, again, like we said, so in addition to the A1C, when we looked at the continuous glucose monitoring data, we also saw that they had decreased glycemic variability, which is really exciting, as we talked about it before. But one of the other things we didn't talk about is glycemic variability, even when A1C is controlled in individuals with type 2 diabetes. So in a more severe case, even when if their A1C is controlled, the lower glycemic variability was associated with better health outcomes, and those with higher glycemic variability had higher rates of cardiovascular death and other heart events. So we're hoping that this is kind of an overall health issue as well, which is really exciting to see there. And then when we look at some of the other outcomes, where we're looking at heart health, because again, metabolic syndrome, it also relates to heart health, we also saw a significant decrease in LDL cholesterol. And again, most participants were already on a statin. And even with that, we're seeing this significant decrease. We didn't have to do any kind of sub-analysis. We're just seeing that decrease as well. And we also saw a mild weight decrease as well. But that, again, was not enough to explain these other benefits.
So let's come back to LDL cholesterol and statin, because I guess the almost a general recommendation now is if you are 40 and above, then you're most likely to be on statin. And I don't remember what percentage of adult above the age of 40 are on statin, but I guess it's more than 50%. So what you're saying is even people who are on statin, they can do time restricting to further reduce their LDL cholesterol.
Yeah, that's exactly
which
right.
which is a big thing, because
Yeah.
we had another episode with a cardiologist, and we had actually two episodes with Elizabeth, and we made a very interesting point that your heart health is at the heart of your health.
Yeah. No, it's crucial, right?
So when you improve your LDL cholesterol, then you are essentially improving the health of your heart, and then heart diseases are the number one cause of death or disability around the world. So time restricting, particularly among adults who are either taking statin or may not be taking statin, can improve the LDL cholesterol. And actually, that reminds me that we actually published a paper recently on mouse studies where we took mice. Those are actually genetically predisposed to have very high level of LDL cholesterol and also produce plaque. And then when we put, actually this was done by Amandine Che, who is a faculty at University of Utah, and when she puts these mice on time restricting, then we saw a 35% reduction in plaque. So not only LDL cholesterol, but eventually the plaque, which is the cause for many of the heart disease, actually reduced. And then so this is interesting that the mouse study and the human studies are kind of aligning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything on HDL cholesterol?
We're actually not seeing big changes in
Actually,
HDL.
in mouse study also, we did not see any change in HDL cholesterol. So
yeah, no, it is really cool to see. And then, the human studies, we're looking at a very heterogeneous population at different stages in their life, at different severities, whereas in the rodent studies, we're able to, you're really able to get a very specific age, a very, homogeneous model that have specific disease. So you can see these really dramatic changes very quickly. But we are seeing those things, they're all the human findings have been pretty consistent with what we've seen in the rodents. And based on that, it's really exciting, because then in the rodent studies, you're also seeing increased lifespan and all these other benefits that we haven't been able to test in humans yet.
Yeah. So you said that there was a modest change in body weight.
Mhm.
Uh, define modest.
So in most of our studies, we see something between 3 and 5% weight loss
Mhm.
in the time restricted eating group. And sometimes in our standard of care groups, you'll usually see a little something just because they're monitoring their food. So they might have more of like a 1 to 2% weight loss. And 5% is generally kind of thought as a significant effect. I think in this one it was 3.5%. But again, it depends on where you start. And this was not, these participants were never told to diet or eat less. This just kind of happen naturally.
So I guess the 5% weight loss, I think that came from DPP and similar studies where
Mm,
those who lost 5% or more, they also reduced their A1C by 0.1% or more.
right.
So that's maybe one of the contributing factors to this
Hmm.
thought that 5% weight loss is
Yeah.
clinically significant because 5% weight loss among pre-diabetes patients
Hmm.
can lead to drop of 0.1%
Right.
A1C, which reduces the chance of getting into type 2 diabetes for the next 2 years by 58 or 55%.
Right.
So the point here is, but have you looked at regression analysis or correlation analysis showing only when people
Yeah.
lost weight,
Yeah, so we
they,
we looked at both decreases in calories and decreases in weight to look if there was an association between that and changes in A1C, and we saw no association whatsoever. So I don't think that the benefits we're seeing there are due to just a decrease in calories or a decrease in weight, because when you look at the participants, kind of all over the board, I really think what we're seeing here is an optimization of the circadian system and optimization of metabolism and gut health and hormone release. Probably it's a systemic system. It's a really holistic system. It's not just
Mhm.
one piece. And how the circadian system affects heart health is very complex as well. Even arterial stiffness fluctuates throughout the day. And there's a lot of components to it, but I don't think it's just a weight
Mhm.
loss issue. So a lot of these studies that say, oh, time restricted eating doesn't work, it's because they didn't lose weight. I don't think that's the main outcome. I really don't. I think it's one marker that you can see sometimes. Again, that might be more apparent if you have a better system, that you're losing a little bit of excess weight, but I don't think that's the main outcome here.
Mhm. But the thing is, many time restricting studies, as you mentioned, the primary outcome has been weight loss
Hmm.
um, because they start with overweight and obese adults
Hmm.
and healthy adults, and then they ask them to
Yeah,
do
sometimes it's within healthy adults. Yeah.
8 hours time
Hmm.
restricted eating or 6 hours in some
Hmm.
cases, or even I've seen 4 hours in
There
one or
was
two
one that
cases,
tested 4 and 6.
four
Yeah.
hours and 6 hours. But those are the participants themselves, they commented that they don't think this is long-term
No.
sustainable. So
No.
8 to 10 is kind of the sweet spot,
Hmm.
it seems. So then the question is, well, what are the other conditions you have seen
Hmm.
where time restricting has shown benefits? We are mostly talking about metabolic disease. There are
Hmm.
other conditions in humans because in mice now there are publications showing time restricting can
Yeah.
stabilize, maybe improve early cases of dementia in Alzheimer's disease model mouse and Huntington disease mouse model. Um, I think there is some studies on either PCOS mouse model or PCOS in humans
Yeah.
pilot studies.
Yeah. There's a
What
pilot
about
study in PCOS.
cancer? Because the number two cause for death
Yeah.
is cancer.
Yeah.
Um, in mouse study, there's yeah. So what are the other things that you are seeing that
Yeah.
you think? Are you involved in any cancer studies? Because you are involved in so many different studies.
We are collaborating with someone who's getting one going right now, and we are excited to kind of do some more understanding how time restricted eating can help individuals that are either going through therapy or are cancer survivors. We just don't have the data back for that yet in humans, but I think that's a really promising, exciting line of work. We have a few other specific models that we're working on as well. So as I said, I'm about to start a shift work study specifically in individuals who do night shift work, which is a whole other challenge that we weren't sure if we could tackle for a while. And I'm excited to get that started. And I think that's going to be a little bit more complex, and we'll see how that goes. Um, But then also there are other groups of individuals, getting back to heart health and, really circulation, where one of our long-term collaborators, Pam Taub, and Mike Wilkinson over at UCSD Med, we just finished up a pilot study in individuals with POTS, which also had some very excited data to see.
To define POTS.
So POTS is a disorder where when individuals, usually from laying when they stand up, they have this rapid increase in heart rate without a change in blood pressure. And it leads to less blood flow to the brain. And so they can feel very lightheaded. They can feel very tired. Actually, Katie Ledecky, the amazing Olympian, just came out and said that she had actually been diagnosed with POTS. And it's really a disease that's underserved. There's not really any, full treatment to make people feel, fully better.
There is also no mouse model.
There's also no mouse model.
Animal model.
And there was a huge increase in the rate of people reporting it after COVID. So it seems like COVID may have led to, after effects led to POTS as well. So it's really this understudied area. And we're seeing actually really big improvements with time-restricted eating, which is really exciting to see. So that paper is on the way.
Review.
It's on the way. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that next time.
Yeah. What are some of the misconceptions about time-restricted eating in the popular media?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think a big misconception, again, is just that it's a weight loss thing. And so when people have looked at it as, oh, it doesn't work because of weight loss. There have been very kind of confusing things about articles that came out. There was a big press release a few months ago from the American Heart Association that said, oh, time-restricted eating is associated with cardiovascular death. And I think that was the most misleading thing I've ever read. It
Why?
was based on an abstract for a poster at a conference, which was not peer-reviewed at all. And when you look at the data, they didn't control for smoking. They didn't control for many different factors. But all that aside, when you look at it, what they did was they took 2 days of dietary records and then said up to 16 years later how many people died based on when they ate on these 2 days of dietary records that were never intended to look at timing of eating. And they said the group that had ate for less than 8 hours had increased rates of death. That group also, they didn't control to say they had to log a certain number of food or anything like that. So it's very likely they
Were they eating enough?
We don't know. We don't know based on this. And the other thing is, even if that were true, 2 days of eating does not mean you're doing time-restricted eating. 2 days of eating means almost nothing, especially 16 years later. It's not indicative of that. They weren't on time-restricted eating. They weren't on anything. It was 2 random days. So you can't make those kinds of claims off of 2 days, right? That doesn't tell you anything. And so when stuff like that comes out that makes these really bold statements that time-restricted eating leads to cardiovascular death, I mean, it's just kind of like a crazy thing to say.
I think it reminds me another issue that if you look at sleep, people who sleep more than 7.5 to 8 hours, there is a correlation that those who slept for 7.5 or longer hours, they lived less number of years than people who said they were sleeping for 6.5 to 7.5 hours. So the question always is, there are people who are already sick and already tired. Are they the ones who are sleeping more because of an underlying condition, or they're actually healthy adults who happen to be sleeping more and then they end up dying early? So the current thinking is, no, actually people who are already sick, they have an underlying condition that makes them very tired, lethargic. Maybe that's what is increasing their sleep length, and that's not healthy long sleep. Whereas somebody who is healthy, they may be, for them, sleeping 7.5 to 8 hours is actually much better. So I think
have to be very careful.
I think in this case, the same thing. Like, this study was done when time-restricted eating was not a thing.
Oh, yeah.
So people who were reported. And how many people actually reported in this study they were eating less than 8 hours?
Oh, it was like 2% of the population
2%.
within the group. And the
So I
other
guess
thing-
if you
yeah.
just randomly take 2% of the population who actually have eating disorders or some they're sick and they cannot just eat, because I see a lot of people, they say, well, I have lost my appetite after this hospitalization or something else.
Sure.
And then they say, we just can't eat because I'm not feeling hungry at all. Right. And so that conveys that there is an underlying condition. That's why they are not eating. It's not that they're trying to lose weight or improve their health. So that's why they're intentionally eating within less than 8 hours and trying to eat healthy food. Or even if you eat, another thing is when you are trying to eat under less than 8 hours, you also have to pay attention that you are eating enough calories. Mm-hmm. So for example, if I decide to eat every day less than 800 kilocal for the next 16 years, I don't think I'll survive 16 years.
Well, that's a pretty severe caloric restriction. Yeah, no, you need to.
No, because what I heard about this particular study was, and in many studies, when people go back and collect this enhanced data, mm-hmm. that they put a cutoff of if people reported 1,000 kilocal, mm-hmm. then they would include them in their analysis.
I see.
Okay. So the general recommendation for an average person in the US is 1,800 kilocal to 2,000 kilocal. Mm-hmm. So that means you are including in your analysis people who have already done 50% calorie restriction. Come on. We know that in mice, 50% calorie restriction will kill them. In humans, none of the calorie restriction studies, intentional calorie restriction, recommends doing less than 25% calorie restriction. Sorry, more than 25% calorie restriction. So that means no nutrition scientist, no one actually suggests that you should reduce your calories for more than 50% for months or years. So I guess this is one important point, take-home point, is when people are reading this, and particularly journalists and reporters, because they have a larger than life influence on public. Mm-hmm. The one thing at least pay attention is to go back and ask, did they record how many calories they're eating? If they're reporting less than X percentage, say 1,500 kilocal or less, then that's not healthy. That's not what time-restricted eating says. That's not even calorie restriction studies says, that one should reduce their caloric intake by more than 25%. So I guess this is one point for the viewers, is when they see this sensational news, they have to go back and look at a few things.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. We went in a tangent, but actually it has a huge impact because people are citing some of the studies saying, okay, it doesn't work. Another thing, what are the other things that are confusing in the media?
That's a good question. Do you have any that you've gotten a lot of?
No, I mean, one thing that I hear from many colleagues is they say, well, most of the effect of time restricting is due to calorie restriction.
Mm. Yeah.
Because people say that, well, if you reduce calorie, then you'll improve your health. Which is true. Means these days, a lot of people who are actually eating a lot of food. And particularly, the bottom line is we cannot stuff more than 2,000 kilocal into a single meal. We need time. So one thing that people may be doing is why we're getting overweight and obese is we keep on eating. Mm-hmm. And it's obvious, like in mouse experiment, of course, when we reduce the time window, mice still eat the same number of calories. But in humans, when you reduce the eating window, then of course there is some calorie restriction, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's what we have seen is maximum 20%, but median is around 8 to 10%.
Yeah, it's usually fairly reasonable. And again, a lot of the times it's cutting out things you probably shouldn't be eating in the first place,
like the alcohol.
like the alcohol or popcorn or dessert late at night or things like that really aren't necessary for health. They're kind of extra, they don't have a lot of nutrients.
Yeah.
And again, those things can be moved forward.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's just moving your meal a little bit forward is enough. And some people, if you don't realize that the timing matters, you wouldn't think to change it. And so just knowing that, a lot of people can make small changes, even an hour here, hour there, that makes a difference. And I think it's one of those things that people are ignorant to. And then also there's been a lot of people, like when you look at weight loss advice, some of them will tell you eat 6 meals a day, eat right before you go to bed so you can avoid this like binge eating situation. But those seem to not be playing out as well, right? Like, and people don't actually like it a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, people have gotten a lot of misinformation over time.
Yeah, so I think coming back to the calorie restriction and time restriction, I think what is important is the nice thing about time restricted studies is we can go back to animals and do time restricted feeding, which is the equivalent. And the animal studies that get a lot of press is you take mice, give them unhealthy food, they become obese, and then you put the same food within 8 hours or 9 hours, and mice eat the same number of calories, they have less weight. That gets a lot of press. But what is interesting is from our lab, we have studies showing that if mice are given healthy diet and they're still eating little bit of food just before going to sleep, or in the middle of the night when mice get up, they have a tiny snack and then they go back to sleep. If we feed these mice within 8 to 10 hours, but healthy food, then there is no change in body weight between mice that eat healthy whenever they want, mice that eat healthy within 8 to 10 hours. But again, this is a study done by my good friend Rafa Di Cabo, who is a very well-respected longevity researcher at National Institute of Health. He showed the same thing, like if mice are given one meal a day and they eat that meal over 10 to 12 hours without reducing calorie versus mice that got to snack throughout 24 hours, then the mice that are in some form of time restriction because they're eating one meal over 10 hours, they live longer. But what is interesting is he did not report any metabolic parameters, for example, triglyceride, glucose, and cholesterol that we typically see in humans. There was no difference between these two groups of mice in their middle age. So I guess in most of the human studies, since we're taking a small snapshot, means 3 months, 6 months, even a year in human life of 80 years or so is a very short snapshot.
Yeah.
And if somebody is eating healthy and maybe eating a little bit late into the night and trying to restrict that to 8 to 10 hours, then he or she may not see a clinically significant change in cholesterol, glucose, etc., if this person is healthy to begin with.
Sure.
So in that way, but at the same time, we also hear about people improving their sleep.
Yeah.
Do you see that in...
Yeah,
what
so
is the
when you
story
use so when we've used like sleep questionnaires or things like that usually are kind of summaries of sleep over weeks of time, we've seen a couple things pop up of maybe they fall asleep a little faster, but no big trends there. The biggest effect we've seen is actually, so on the My Circadian Clock app, we have it so when they wake up, they can say, did you feel rested when you woke up? And there we actually do see a significant improvement in the group that had done time restricted eating, where they do feel more rested when they wake up. And we've seen this in multiple studies over the years. And so I do think it does lead to a more restful sleep. I think, personally, I feel that way as well. But just from my own experience, but I do think it's affecting sleep. One of the other things we haven't even talked about is I think it affects mood and cognition as well. And we're actually starting we're starting a study looking at time restricted in bipolar disorder, because I think it's important.
Bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
That's pretty tough.
Yes, we'll see how it goes. I think
so. Can you tell us a little bit about this study? Who is leading this study? Where? And
Yeah.
Because the protocol is already published.
Yeah, so the protocol is published. So the study is based out of UC Berkeley. Go Bears.
You want to?
I did my undergrad there. It's based in UC Berkeley. It's led by Sherry Johnson. Lance Kriegsfeld is also part of the team there. And we also have collaborators in Australia. It's like a big multiple cohort. But it's aimed at using time-restricted eating as a way to address bipolar disorder. There's actually 2 studies as part of it. One is going to be open to anyone where they can do time-restricted eating remotely. And then there's another subpart that will be more local in the Bay Area where they actually come in and give samples and things like that as well. But the idea is to see if time-restricted eating versus kind of general healthy eating alone can actually affect bipolar symptoms.
Are there any pilot studies, some small studies, or in your own studies that you are involved in so many different studies? You might have given a mood questionnaire or SF-36 questionnaire.
So most studies usually screen out people that have depression that's uncontrolled, and so we haven't really looked at that too much. But interestingly, in our firefighter study, and importantly, this happened during COVID. A lot of it, like. The study still happened during, a big portion of the study still happened while COVID was going on. And we found that in the time-restricted eating group, we didn't see any significant changes in mood, but in the standard of care group, we actually saw a deficit in mood where they got much worse as time went on. And so we think maybe it's a stabilizing factor, which could potentially be through sleep or mood or some other things. And as a field, we know that circadian disruption does affect mood and depressive symptoms and things like that. In fact, in a lot of these really intensive trials, like run at Harvard, where they have these labs that they can keep them in for weeks or months at a time, if they or any member of their family has had depression or bipolar disorder or things like that, they usually aren't even allowed to participate in the study because actively disrupting you would be likely cause a problem. And so we know that circadian disruption can cause increased episodes or cause the occurrence of depression or anxiety. And so it's one of those things where, it makes logical sense. And I think time will tell with research, but using time-restricted eating as a way of supporting the circadian system may also help manage those symptoms.
But when you said time-restricted eating as a way to manage circadian rhythm, of course, in animals, in our studies, we can take plasma samples, liver samples throughout 24 hours, and we do see improvement in circadian rhythm, molecular signature.
Yeah.
Is there any human time-restricted eating study where people have actually looked at circadian rhythm and hormones, like cortisol, melatonin, or anything else so far? Or what would be your dream experiment?
Not really. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point. We see time-restricted eating as supporting the circadian system and that's supporting health, but it's kind of going into this black box of we're looking at how time-restricted eating affects health, but we're not really looking at that middle point of what actually changed. And is it a melatonin issue? Is it cortisol? Is it all hormone? What is actually changing at a circadian level? So yeah, if I had continuous melatonin, continuous cortisol, if you're able to look at enzymes through, take liver samples every hour, you're just saying dream experiment, right? If you could just know this information, right? Obviously, we don't want to hurt anyone, but if you just knew what this information was, that would be extremely enlightening. What is going on in different parts of the body? What areas of the brain are being activated? And some of these things we can get at, so we can do really intensive PSG recordings. We can do some of this other stuff. But again, you usually need to know these things day after day after day, which is why a CGM or an ActiWatch that tests activity or something where you have these passive monitorings are super insightful because it's not a one-day thing. When you're looking at a 24-hour period, you need multiple events. And a lot of these things are either one time point or they're one day, but they're not usually multiple days. And so it's a very hard thing to study.
So what are the current studies going on that you are leading? You said there is a current type 2 diabetes study. So what is that study?
Yeah. So
do you need patients? What is going on there?
Yes, we do. If you are in the San Diego area and you have type 2 diabetes, please call me. Yeah. So one of the other studies we're leading
No,
right
actually,
now.
this is so you are still looking for
We are
patients.
still looking
So
for
tell
patients.
us a little about that
Yes, so
study.
this study is again, it's funded by the Larry Hillblom Foundation, which is a really cool foundation that supports researchers in California on specifically diabetes and aging. This study.
And you were a Larry Hillblom fellow.
Yeah, I also had my postdoctoral fellow with them as well, also doing time restricted eating work, some of the work we talked about earlier today. Yeah, they're a great organization. And a lot of this work is this study is really focusing on individuals with type 2 diabetes, and it's a 6-month study. So again, we do a 2-week baseline where we get current assessments. We do a 3-month guided intervention. We're doing continuous glucose monitors at baseline and at 3 months, and that's where our primary outcomes are. But we're also doing it a 6-month follow-up. So for the next 3 months, participants will do a self-guided intervention where they're really guiding themselves more. We don't have as much interaction. They don't have to log every day. They just log 2 weeks a month, so we can still understand when they're eating. And then we take all those assessments again at the end of the study. And so that one's really exciting because in addition to just looking at a population that does have bigger health challenges, these participants are also on GLP-1 agonists. They're on SGLT2, which are common medications that you see in individuals with diabetes. And one of the other questions we really wanted to ask was it safe? You talked about this hypoglycemic issue, but that's when those participants weren't on those medications. And in this group, we're seeing it is very safe. And one of the things we did to test that was participants took a finger prick every morning and would test both ketone levels to see if they were fasting too much, if they're going, people get scared of going into like a ketoacidosis or something. And also to test their fasting blood glucose to see if they're getting hypoglycemic because they're not wearing the CGM the entire time and we don't see the data in real time. And we found there were no problems there whatsoever. So we're actually able to decrease the number of times people have to prick their fingers. But it's really exciting to see that it's safe. One, I think we're going to see really big effects in this nighttime glucose, which is more dramatic in individuals with type 2. And the study's still ongoing, so I don't have all the results yet, but I'm excited to see where it goes.
Okay, so you mentioned that people who are already on different, most popular form of glucose-lowering drugs, metformin,
I think almost everyone, all but like a couple people are on metformin.
Yeah, metformin, almost everybody is on metformin.
Almost everyone's metformin, yeah.
And then some are also on SGLT2 inhibitor class of drugs, you said. And then even some people are on GLP-1 receptor agonists, so Ozempic, Wegovy, all those.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that although people think that the Ozempic and Trulicity and Zepbound, all of these can cure your type 2 diabetes. A lot of people actually lower their glucose, but they are still above 6.5. So that's what you're looking for.
Yeah. So in this,
so you're looking for people who are taking the medications and still their HbA1c is above 6.5. That's very important to point out.
Yes, it is. Yes. So these are people that they have to be stable on these medications. And we found with the GLP-1s, they need to be stable for a long time because they can continue to have effects for a longer period of time. Usually we require a 3-month stability. And with this, we require a 6 at least. But these are,
so those who have started the GLP-1 class of drugs at least 6 months.
At least 6 months before starting the study and are still at least a 6.5 A1C. Yeah.
Or above.
And we cut it off at 9. You can't be on insulin. That's one thing that is exclusionary for this study. But yes, I mean, we've had participants who've been on GLP-1s for years and were stable and still had type 2 diabetes and were able to put them in the study and see if we can get a benefit from just TRE.
And then this recruitment will end sometime in 2025.
Yeah, probably early 2025. So in the next 6 months or so.
If you're listening to this before 2025 June, likely, then you can connect with Dr. Manoogian, and we'll put the email address there. If you're living in San Diego area, because it does involve quite a few visits. And what the participants get to wear a continuous glucose monitor for
Yeah.
2 weeks. They get their data at the end.
Yes, you get all your data at the end. You don't see it while you're in the study, so as to not bias you, but you get a lot of information out of the study, which is really cool.
They also get all the cool blood works. What are the blood
Lots of
works?
cool blood. Yeah. So one of the things, so we run, like what you would expect, obviously, A1C, fasting glucose, insulin. We're also running lipid panels, and we also do NMR lipo profiles. So we're not just LDL cholesterol, but also LDL particle number and all these other really insightful measures that give you a much better look at what your heart health kind of is. So really in-depth biomarkers is there as well.
And they also get their sleep-wake cycle, how many times they're waking up and all that stuff.
Yeah, so you also will have you wear an ActiWatch, something like this, where it's tracking kind of your movement. And the nice thing is they don't have to do anything. You just wear it, but we're able to see when you're sleeping, how much you're moving, the light exposure that you get. And so we're able to kind of track that. So you get information on, when you were sleeping and when you're awake. You can see your continuous glucose monitor and how it responded to that, and you're logging your food so you can see what you ate and how your glucose responded and how you slept that night. And honestly, it's a very powerful combination of data to understand how your specific behaviors are affecting you, because people respond differently to different foods. If you're talking on a CGM, someone might have a big response to a bagel and maybe not a big response to a donut. It really depends on the individual. Some people,
I respond to both of them.
Yeah. Some people are super sensitive to like rice and some aren't, so it's really good to see like, what are the foods I eat and how do they affect me? We've actually seen in certain participants, we saw like, oh, this person's having these big spikes for these days. And we went back and looked and it was like, this one food is causing these spikes. And having that information is super powerful to make even small changes that have big effects on health.
And if people are seeing this after 2025 June, or if you don't live in San Diego area, there is also MCC app has a diabetes.
So the My Circadian Clock app is open to anyone in the world to use. If you have an Android or iPhone, it's free to download, and you can start logging. And one of the things we've done is to kind of capture different disease populations or different challenges that people are going through. Is when you do log up, you can say if you identify with post-COVID, or if you're a cancer survivor, or if you do have diabetes. And so we can see how, whatever goals you set for yourself, how those things might affect your health as well.
Good. And then there are now quite a few thousand people who are using this,
many
right?
thousands of users, and we're getting a lot of really, really cool data.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that mega data coming out. And actually our lab is now analyzing millions of food pictures and food records from thousands of people from all over the world.
Yeah.
I forgot to ask you one simple question. How did you get into this time restricting or circadian rhythm?
Those are two different questions.
Yeah.
I got into circadian rhythms because I was taking a hormones and behavior class as a sophomore at Berkeley, and with Lance Kriegsfeld, actually, small world. And I just fell in love with the subject, and originally got into it through seasonal reproduction, linking back to all those hormones and circadian control, and then went down more of the
seasonal reproduction in animals.
In animals, all in animals, yes. Yeah. And then went down more of a circadian path, and I did my PhD with Eric Bittman at UMass Amherst, and really got into the neurobiology behind circadian rhythms and how you could adapt them by just, having these mutations in one clock protein could really completely change circadian health. And then I think I invited you out for a talk, actually, many years ago now. And we started talking, and I think I had heard about it from you originally and some of the original work that Amandine had done. And I just thought it was, and Hattori, obviously, Megumi's, and I think that's really where I fell in love with this idea. And we had started talking about, okay, well, we could do this in humans. And at the time, I was really interested in starting to take the circadian knowledge I had. And I really had kind of this very basic, robust knowledge of the field, but I couldn't use it, and I was really excited to be able to put this out there into the world, because as a field, circadian biology has really been based in curiosity and what happens when it's broken. And there hadn't been a lot of how can we help it? How can we support it? How can we improve it? And time-restricted eating became this really cool window as a way of a first step of, okay, we can actually improve health by just making some small tweaks to support the circadian system. And here we are.
So what is next? If you have to design a new human intervention, then what will that intervention or lifestyle change would look like? Means when you're saying time restricting, we're just focusing on food aspect of circadian rhythm.
Yeah, exactly. So TRE is one component of a healthy circadian life, right? So I would include that, but I would also add timing of lighting exposure, good sleep hygiene and timing, exercise timing. I think there's even a component to social, like stimulants, controlling the timing of stimulants, whether it's social media exposure or having a fight with your spouse or difficult conversations. There are times for this, right place,
Is there a
right
good time to fight with your spouse?
Not to fight. Maybe you can avoid the fight. Have intense conversations.
Okay.
It's not a good thing to do just before you go to bed. And so I think timing all these big parts of our life, I think you can kind of go through your day, align the day, and make a few little tweaks that actually have really big outcomes. So I think combining lighting, exercise, eating, and really creating this very kind of holistic, like you're telling your body to be awake when it's time to be awake. You let your body rest when it's night. It sounds so obvious, but we abuse it so much. And I think just a few little tweaks can really support that and make even bigger outcomes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other point you would like to make? Or is there anything that I forgot to discuss?
I'm sure there's something that I forgot, but I would just say the take-home message is like your bodies have a clock, everything, it's there because it's an anticipatory system to like help everything be in the right place at the right time. And when we do things against that, it hurts us. And so look at your life, think about how you can support your clocks. And even a small change can make a big difference.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Manoogian, and I'm really looking forward to your next study, particularly this type 2 diabetes study, because there are so many people who are struggling with type 2 diabetes, and even with the new drugs, sometimes they are also fighting with adverse side effect, nausea, and then GI issues. So it'll be interesting to see whether these participants who are in your study, who are on Ozempic-like drugs for last 1 year or more than 6 months, what happens to them? Does time restricting actually helps them to further lower their blood glucose, or whether it makes it worse, or whether time restricting makes the side effects worse or better? Because these are the new type of drugs. It's almost like I feel like we're in the same inflection point as was in late 90s when statins came out. That completely changed how we managed cholesterol. So I think the same kind of excitement is going on right now with Ozempic class of drugs, GLP-1 receptor agonist class of drugs. But as you mentioned, people on statins are still seeing improvement when they combine statin with time restricting. So I guess I'm curious to see whether GLP-1 drugs can be combined with time restricting, or maybe those who are taking GLP-1 drugs for weight loss, after they achieve their weight loss, can they be on time restricting to maintain that weight loss? Because what we are hearing and what we are also seeing is a lot of people gain back that weight. So there are a lot of questions out there, and I guess another point for viewers is, although you may be hearing a lot of hypes, a lot of advice from many internet influencers and leaders in this health journey, there are very few people who are actually doing rigorous clinical trials like Dr. Manoogian is doing. And those clinical trials are actually revealing what is likely to benefit a wider range of individuals. So that's also very important, that some of these studies are very expensive, time consuming, it's not easy to recruit patients who are willing to come and participate because how many people you are actually recruiting per month right now?
Oh, it's a smaller number. I mean, partially because a lot of people are actively starting GLP-1 agonists, and we need them to be stable, right? And
I
so
see.
if they're just starting a medication, they're automatically ruled out for that. And so the
If
and
they're
this
stable, then they
if they're
can.
stable, they could, but if they're just starting the medication, they're actively changing, then obviously we don't want to enroll them because any changes could be due to that, right? We want to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sure we're seeing results from our intervention. And it's not just us, we're seeing this from collaborators all over the country, where it is harder to get someone who is just stable because there's a lot of changes going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's clinical trials are always very difficult. And working with you at the same time, I'm saying like, yes, I can order 200 mice from Jack's lab and then start the time restricting tomorrow and then get the results in 6 months or so, whereas human studies are really time consuming.
At least 5
Uh,
years usually.
yeah, usually 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And so stay tuned because these studies are revealing what is actually happening in unbiased clinical trials. And also, these are expensive studies. There are many studies where we collect a huge amount of plasma and then some samples that takes thousands of dollars to analyze.
Yeah.
And it's also very difficult to raise that funding. So another thing you can help with is you can easily go to the link and donate to the lab because some of that donation will actually go towards analyzing blood samples, plasma samples, and even in some studies, you actually took muscle biopsy in this
Yeah, we
study,
did
right?
muscle biopsy in this last one. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have muscle biopsy from these participants, and we'll figure out whether time-restricted eating actually improved some mitochondria function in
Yeah.
muscle, or it improved fuel utilization in this, and whether there was a mild increase in ketone or something else. So sometimes the funding doesn't cover for all of these results that everybody is curious about.
Yeah.
So your donations will also go towards finding some of these answers from samples that have already been collected and are in freezers.
Yeah. Ready to
So
go.
with that, thank you again, Emily, for doing all these exciting studies, and congratulations on getting your first NIH-funded study
Thank
starting.
you.
It's not a small feat to get NIH funding, National Institute of Health funding, to start independent studies for investigators. And as you heard, Emily is also involved in at least a dozen different ongoing or completed studies. So she is the fountain of new knowledge about time-restricted eating. And you'll also see quite a few really nice reviews written for anyone from general curious adults to scientists who are eager to learn about time-restricted eating. Thank you.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll touch base again after your next study is completed.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.